These are the parts of the MD gearbox that we're going to overhaul today. See, we've got the new parts here, all the seal assemblies. You've got the shaft and the bearings. This is a special tool, by the way, which we'll be showing you how you use. And you've got to make sure, obviously, that this gear is in good condition before you reuse it, and the worm on the other part of the gear. So we're going to commence now with rebuilding the gearbox. So I'll just get it on. So one of the first actions is we're going to put the bearings onto the shaft. The bearing's now bottomed. Turns freely. And that's a smooth fit in the housing. If you've got a tight fit, there's obviously something amiss, so it should slide in nicely. Okay, the next action is we're going to put in the circlip. Make sure you're wearing safety goggles for this action. So now you can see the circlips in position inside the housing. So the action now has been to put the keyway in. You've got to make sure it's nice and level inside the keyway itself. So this should be quite an easy fit onto the shaft. If you have trouble getting it on, then it's most likely you've got some sort of burr on the gear, the keyway, or the shaft itself. And there's a retaining washer screw. Just nip it up tight. I'll pull the gear down the last bit of the way, and you're good to go to the next. So these are the bearings and the shaft with the seal assembly that we're going to assemble inside here now. So that's the next stage you're going to see. Okay, the next stage of the assembly is we're going to place the bearing inside the housing. It's a bit tricky, but you can get it in. You might find that you just have to tap the bearing in lightly to get it to seat. If it goes in off square, it'll be quite difficult to arrange that. So the next part now is we're going to put the shaft in. And that goes into the inner part of the bearing, and then if you look at the mesh, you can see the meshing of the gear. Again, you can just lightly tap that in and you'll see it go down all the way. We've now got complete meshing of the gear. And we're just making sure it's seated on the bearing itself. Okay, the next stage is to pop the other bearing in. No particular way it needs to go. Good practice to have the numbers outside, but you can just pop that in. And finally, the oil seal. What we're doing is we're just using the old bearing just to seat the oil seal down correctly. And we're just going to tap it down. That should have got the oil seal down in its final position now, and you can retrieve the bearing. Retrieve the bearing, you can go through the side and then just wiggle it till it comes out. It shouldn't be a tight fit in there, but you can see now you've got the oil seal correctly centred and seated. Get the seal in to the point where the circlip goes in. The next action is fitting the circlip.
So for the seals, you've got three types. You've got solid ring, centre coned ring, and the final flat ring.
Okay.
You have to assemble correctly.
But of course this is in the parts list, isn't it? It shows you in the parts list
Yeah.
how to put it together, so you shouldn't technically get it wrong, but obviously double check otherwise the sealing of the compressor and moisture from the drum will just pass the seal instantly.
And these can be fitted into the gearbox.
So the whole package goes on together like that. And these are made out of Teflon. Steel retaining ring that goes on the spring. Okay, if you're in the field, we're going to show you a method that's using a hammer and a tool that actually sits inside of here and goes to the outer shoulder, so you get a good effect pressing it. But of course, if you're in your own workshop, you might be better using hydraulic press. You get it absolutely square first time. We're going to demonstrate using the hammer method. Okay, so make sure it's absolutely square. Okay, it's got to go down to the bottom. You'll see there's a little lip there. What we might do now as well, obviously because it can actually chaff the edge, is we'll just check that edge before we put it onto the shaft, and then the housing itself. So we've just cleaned that up, haven't we, and we're now just going to put an O-ring on it. You can put a bit of grease on there as well, which will help with the sealing. So before you actually fit this assembly back in the machine, you should check that this gap has not deviated inwards, which will obviously be a problem when you have to put the pin into the MD drum itself. So just make sure that that's a nice fit. Okay, we're just going to enter this down now onto the shaft through the bush. Should be just a fairly smooth fit. Now we're going to put the 4 screws in. That just seats down into the bottom. And then what we're going to do is pull it back down completely against the spring tension with the 4 screws. Okay, so we're just tightening the 4 screws now, just nip them down. So if we look at the new and old seal by comparison, you can see the old seal here has got rather worn. They sometimes rip on this edge. Once it does that, it starts letting moisture back down the centre and it gives you more problems. So the new seal is now going on. It's just a push on fit. That's designed just to push the moisture away from going down the shaft and into the gearbox itself. So this, when you try to turn this gear, it'll be quite difficult because of the design of the gear. So normally you would only be able to turn it from the shaft. You can see now the shaft inside. It's only possible to move it with that. You can't do it by just trying to turn that. So don't think there's anything wrong. Just check it with the screwdriver on that end that everything's free moving. Just a point on fitting the cover. Each one of these is a copper seal because you've actually got oil in the gearbox that you fill it up with. So we don't put any oil in at this stage. We only put the oil in after we've fitted the cover. We fit a new gasket on the cover as well. Okay, so you fill in the oil through this part here, and the way it works is when you get to this line inside the gearbox, that's sufficient oil. Don't overfill it, and of course don't forget to put the oil in or you'll have a very short life of the gearbox itself.